This is a seminar or a webinar, excuse me, on design thinking and how it connects to product management. My name is Nick Kramer. I like to put this picture on my slide decks lately because it's my happy place. So I am going to share with you what I have learned on how to incorporate design thinking and why I think it is so important. All right, so in this little webinar, we are going to talk about a couple of things. We're going to learn about design thinking and how it connects to lean startup and agile. We're going to talk about why you might want to use design thinking, who uses design thinking, and where design thinking applies. We're going to talk a little bit about the process of how design thinking works, and then at the end we will do Q&A. But again, like we talked about, please just interrupt. Just one second, I'm going to turn off all my notifications. Sorry. Okay. So the first thing I'd like to talk about, this is not necessarily based in Agile too much, but since I'm in Agile, I wanted to talk a little bit about Agile requirements. And as everybody knows, we write Agile requirements as user stories, and we generally use the format as a I want, so that, or we're trying to figure out who the problem is or who the story is for, who the requirement is for, what the problem is we're trying to solve, what's the goal, and why are we trying to solve that problem. Now, this is a pretty standard format in most organizations. I work with a lot of organizations that are not even using Agile, that are using this Agile story format to convey requirements between the product owner and stakeholders and the team. So this is a pretty standard process. And I'm sure a lot of you have seen this particular graphic before, where the way we send the user story off, depending on where it came from and who it's going to go to, the way it gets interpreted can be very different than the way it was meant to be, right? So if we are trying to interpret the customer in the lower right there, marketing might interpret it one way, engineers might develop it or interpret it another, and so on and so on. And so there's a lot of guessing game on what should we build and why should we build it. So the first question that comes to mind to me is, how do we know if we're building the right thing? It's tricky. Lots of organizations spend lots of time and energy guessing at what a customer will want. Let's say you have your mobile app and you're trying to decide, would our customers like this feature or that feature? A lot of times it's difficult to understand, if we build it, will they actually use it? So the first question we like to ask ourselves when we're talking about design thinking is, how do we know if we're building the right thing? The next question that we need to understand in great detail is, who is our customer? Who is the customer? Now, if you ask many people in your organization, we're going to talk about a mythological here mobile app that, let's say, we all use. If you ask a dozen people in an organization, who is your customer on a mobile app, I'm willing to bet you're going to get a dozen different answers. Some people are going to say it's the end user customer. Some people might say it's a specific profile of an end customer. Depending on your role, you might say that your customer is the product owner. You might say that your customer is the marketing department or the legal department. And it's all about perception. But what we're trying to do when we're thinking about design thinking and incorporate this process, we're trying to always identify our end customer, our customer that's actually using our platform and who is actually gaining the benefit from what we're providing them. So then the third question that comes up is, how do you know what a customer really wants, right? You could always try this method. I have a coworker that I work with who thinks this slide is the most hilarious thing ever. So when I was putting this deck together, it made me think of him, so I put it here. because he literally laughs out loud every single time he sees it. I don't know why he thinks this is so funny, but you can try this, right? You could try a mind meld with your customers, but it's not going to have any results, right? So the next best thing about mind melding with our customers is to actually run through the design thinking process. So what we're trying to do when we're talking about design thinking is to put ourselves in our customers' shoes and to figure out what they really want, what their real problems are, and how can we add value to solve those problems. We're not going to try to guess what our customers want. We're not going to throw things at the wall and hope that it sticks and hope something, that it adds value or someone's willing to pay for it. We're actually going to prove it out first before we write a single line of code. All right, the typical agile process works something like this. Somebody, or even the project management process works like this. Somebody comes up with a great idea. Off to the left here, somebody comes up with a great idea. Boy, it would sure be nice if our software did this. Or I think our customers would really find a lot of benefit in that. So they come up with this idea, they enter it into the product backlog. The product owner then somewhere along the way decides what they would like to put in the next product increment. So they slice that off and start writing epics and user stories, requirements for the next release cycle. And then of course the team picks it up for the next sprint backlog and starts to run through the process. This is a pretty typical project management lifecycle, whether you use Scrum or Kanban or traditional waterfall, pretty much the basic part of the beginning here is the same all the way around. Now, in modern project management, product management, we change the rules just slightly from the traditional waterfall methodology. So what we're trying to do is to create a product thinking mentality in our organization. We want to, instead of thinking in terms of projects, we want to think about how can we build teams and people that can sustain the product for its entire life cycle from beginning to end. How can we install a product owner that can look at the vision of the product, understand the customers, help work with the customers to identify new features, and create a consistent roadmap that can consistently add value and return on investment. Now, in order to do that, we have to change our thinking just a little bit. We have to empower a product owner to understand the vision of the product, the overall vision. We have to empower them to understand what the business objectives are in an organization and how are we going to connect the business objectives with the product vision. Do they align? Do we need to modify them? Then all organizations have timeframes. Do we want to release quarterly? Do we want to release every 6 months? Do we want to release ad hoc? So our product owners need to understand how those timelines connect to the objectives and the vision of the product. Now, the key part of a product management, moving to a product management, is to understand themes. Now, themes you might be familiar with from a agile perspective is something different, but in product management, we kind of repurpose this word, unfortunately. And themes are actual customer needs. They are actual problems or jobs that we need to perform for the customers. These are the outcomes that our customers would like to see from us, not the outputs, right? So there is a clear distinction here between outcomes and outputs, right? An output would be a screen or a report or something like that. But the outcome is what we're actually providing it for, right? We need to have something so we can analyze XYZ data. That is an outcome. The report is an output, right? I need a way to successfully manage my shopping cart, right? The ability to successfully manage the shopping cart is an outcome, whereas the shopping cart itself is an output. A lot of times we get stuck in a mentality where we're focused too much on outputs and not enough on outcomes. So in a modern product management style, we start focusing on customer themes or outputs, or excuse me, outcomes rather than outputs. Then we start to build our roadmap around those outputs. What kind of outcomes are we looking to solve for our particular customers? And we start to build a roadmap of new features that we want to build right away. What features are we going to build next? And which ones are we going to build later? So I have slightly modified the previous diagram to show here we use design thinking to inform our product management backlog to create a new, next, later prioritized roadmap of themes, of themes, yes, themes. And then we slice those themes off and start to create epics. And then we run those epics into user stories and we run them through the process. Now, this might seem like a subtle change, but it is a masterstroke of creating value for your customers, because now we are thinking about outcomes and not outputs. The previous example here, the way we define epics here, was all about how are we going to create output. Now we start to think in terms of the customer and what kind of outcomes are they looking for. All right, don't forget to raise your hands if you have questions. It is a subtle shift, and hopefully it'll all start to pop together here in a moment. Now, as many people are aware, there are lots of different Agile scale frameworks. The most popular one in the United States is SAFe. And as you can see here on SAFe, SAFe distinctly calls out design thinking as a way to create a customer-centric approach to understanding what your customers want on each release train. This class is not necessarily about SAFe. It isn't about SAFe at all, but I just want to point out that design thinking is becoming more and more of the mainstream. If you use other project management scaled frameworks such as LESS or Disciplined Agile Delivery, they also specifically call out design thinking in one way or another as a way to focus on actual customer needs. So this is becoming the norm. Design thinking dovetails neatly into the already predetermined practices that we use in an Agile framework, right? Design thinking is the process where we explore the problem. Then we move into a lean or a lean startup mentality, where then we decide, are we building the right thing? And is it feasible? And then the last thing we do is we build that thing. Here is a little bit better, more robust diagram that defines all the processes in the entire process. So design thinking has several phases, which we're going to talk about, which drops then neatly into the experiment, measure, build, and learn process of lean startup, which then drops into the build process of Agile, which then drops off into the continuous adaptation process, or this can be referred to as the DevOps process in some organizations. How are we going to deploy it and release it correctly? Now you'll notice that there are four major pieces to this diagram: design thinking, lean startup, Agile, and continuous adaptation. You do not have to employ all of them at once, or even employ any of them. You could skip some of them altogether. You could go directly from design thinking into the Agile process. You could go right in from lean startup to Agile, right? You can take lean startup out, right? You can take the continuous adaptation process out if that's not how your organization works. Each of these is a puzzle piece that you, or a tool that you can deploy across your organization to help you receive the benefits that you are looking for. So if you're not familiar with all of these, that's okay. We can definitely have a conversation about them, or I'm happy to provide webinars on all of these topics free of cost to your organization at any time. So if you'd like to have a lunch and learn about design thinking, I'm happy to do that. If you'd like to have a lunch and learn about what lean startup is, I'm happy to do that. Or at Agile, we can do that. Just send a little email to WebAge and we're happy to set those up. All right. Design thinking, as we talked about, design thinking, lean startup, and agile are also a huge part of SAFe. So again, these are integrated into modern frameworks. All right, so why would we want to use design thinking? Let's get to the meat of it. Design thinking is about creating innovative solutions at a cheap cost and testing those solutions to define whether our customers will actually use them. It's a way of figuring out what our customers are going to want quickly and easily before we even write a single line of code. Now, that does not mean it is simple. Design thinking is not about creating design. This is one of those unfortunate things. We named it design thinking. So instantly people start to think about UI, UX design and about the way things look on a screen and how the layouts work. And that is not necessarily the case. Now you can take these, what you learn from design thinking, and plug them into UI, UX designs. But this is a whole separate process from that. It's not about UI, UX. It's not about creating websites. It is not for creative people. Well, it is for creative people, but it's not only for creative people. A lot and many organizations use it across a lot of skill levels, including development teams, architects, marketing, legal, all kinds of areas use design thinking. And it's not just for products, solid products, right? As we're going to see here, we're going to talk a little bit about some products, but it can be used for website design. It can be used for marketing materials. It can be used for training materials. I use design thinking heavily in my training practice when I'm trying to design new classes. So it's about thinking about what your customers want, right? So who uses design thinking? And the answer is almost every successful company in the United States uses design thinking in one way or another. It saves them millions of dollars every single year and allows them to get a quicker return on their investment. Speaking of return on investment, here are some quick facts that you can read through about organizations that use design thinking. 75% of organizations claim that they're using some sort of design thinking. Some don't even know they're doing it until you explain it to them. 71% of design thinking organizations says it improves their culture. It creates a culture of visibility and accountability by helping everyone see what the end customer wants. 69 says they perceive it to create more innovation, and 69% believe that makes the whole process more efficient. So design thinking is very important. Companies that use design thinking, you can see them here, generally outperform on the stock exchange other companies by quite a bit. So it is a proven system. Okay, oops, that's a quote I put in there twice, mostly because I think it's a good one. Design is not just what it looks like and feels like, is really how it works, what value it adds. So we talked about a little bit about where design thinking applies. Product design, product management, customer acquisition, trying to find new customers, organizational change, lots and lots of different areas. Okay. Ooh. So understanding what design thinking is creates many benefits. Some of them are about making sure that we are understanding the customer's needs. We create a clear product specification, right? We know now what our customers are willing to do, what their problems are, how they're willing to engage with us, what they're willing to pay for, all of those things up front. It definitely creates a more collaborative environment across all the teams, the product owner, the customer, the developers, the analysts, the architects, creates a more collaborative, visible environment. And you could create more leadership buy-in because it creates a structure where you can prove what a customer really wants. So what does a customer really want and how can you provide it? Comes down to this intersection of where's my business, what is the viability of my business, What is the desirability of what our customers want? What's the feasibility of the technology that we possess? Where those things intersect is the goal that we should be targeting. And this is what design thinking is going to help us find, is this goal in the middle. So design thinking in 5 minutes is a way to connect with our customers, create emotional and empathetic stories that help us identify what their true needs are. It's about finding people, bringing people, perspective, and focus into cycles that can create a testing structure to help us identify customer needs. And lastly, it is a human-centric approach. It has nothing to do with technology. It is very low fidelity. It's a way of creating radical collaboration across multiple cross-functional groups. And it is a definite process that is biased towards solutioning for real problems, not making or building. So it's about solving problems for people, not necessarily about building or creating products. All right. It is a non-linear process. We're going to talk about these steps a little bit, but it's about you understand what a customer's process is, then you observe that process, then you define, and then you ideate to find solutions for that problem, then you prototype that problem for the customer, and then you test that solution. And at any point during this process, you might jump back to another point in the process. You might decide during your creating ideas to solve customer problems that you don't know what the real problem is, and you might go back and observe your customers some more. Or when you are prototyping, you might decide that you need to redefine your problem, so you jump back to the definition phase. So it is not a linear process. It is a process that jumps all around. Now, the expectations of design thinking is that you're going to incrementally improve as you go, where in reality, you're going to start off in one position and it's going to feel sometimes like you're spinning around in circles, but eventually you will come to a solution or a true problem that you can solve. Now, the best way to walk you through what design thinking is, I'm just going to show you a quick video that I really like, that I show in my classes, that I have stolen off of the internet. So I'm going to show this video now. It's way better than the video even I created. So here we go.
Design strategy is about thinking differently, putting yourself in your...
Oops, sorry.
Design strategy is about thinking differently, putting yourself in your customer's shoes, to design solutions that not only fit their needs but delight them, by empathizing through observing people in real-life scenarios like shopping, or through open-ended interviews to uncover what people do rather than what they want. Because if you ask people what they want, they don't necessarily know. By immersing yourself in your customer's world, you can understand their needs, gains, and pains. How? 1. Empathize. Immerse yourself in your customer's world. 2. Define the non-obvious insights. 3. Ideate. Brainstorm solutions. 4. Prototype. Build an MVP, minimum viable product, of ideas in the shortest possible time. Then take those prototypes back to your customers and ask what they think. Design strategy starts with the customer, then offers the solution, not the other way around. For example, an Australian supermarket chain wanted to design a unique, engaging in-store experience to further set them apart from competitors. So we followed their customers around, interviewed them, and watched what was happening in store over a considerable period. Customers wanted to feel more connected with the suppliers of their produce, an in-store experience they couldn't find elsewhere. One of the winning ideas was an in-store milk dispenser with old-style glass milk bottles. Customers fill the bottles with single-origin, high-quality milk. They can see details of the cows and farms that produced it, with assurance the suppliers received a better price. This experience delights customers and is very successful across stores. If we had asked what customers wanted, they'd probably have said cheaper produce. But by empathizing, living and observing, we developed an idea that not only excites customers, but gives the store a unique edge by connecting with customers' hearts and minds.
All right. I think that is a great video that I took off YouTube that kind of describes it in a nutshell. So design thinking runs through basic 5 steps, as the video talks about. It's about empathizing with our customers. So the first step is that we need to go out and we need to figure out and observe our customers and figure out what they really want from us, how we can really help them solve problems. It's about engaging with them, empathizing. It's about interviewing them, observing them, immersing ourselves in their lives, and really wearing their shoes to figure out the challenges that they have on a daily basis. As we are aware, customers have, many needs. There's this, physical needs, safety needs, biological needs, all of those things. We really need to understand what our customers' needs are in the space that we operate in. One great way to do that is to use an empathy map, to think about how when we're talking to our customers and we're observing what they say, try to put ourselves in what did they say, what is the physical thing they did when they talked about it, how did it make them feel, what are the internal thoughts that they're trying to tell themselves. So we really need to find a way to empathize with our customers. We are trying to put ourselves in their shoes. Now, one of the really hard things to do when you're empathizing or observing your customers is to take bias out of the picture, right? Sometimes in an organization, we have in our mind that if we do something, for sure it will solve our customer's problem. For sure they will pay for it. We really want to approach design thinking from a neutral perspective without any of that baggage of our own personal perspective, because what we believe might be true generally is not true, right? We also need to learn to read between the lines on what a customer is telling us, because oftentimes what a customer tells us the problem isn't necessarily what the true problem is. So it's about really putting ourselves in the customer's shoes, interviewing them, watching what they do, watch how they behave, understanding their real problems. Once we've done that, we can go then through and we go back through our notes in our empathy process, our interview questions. We start compiling data and we try to define what the problem was, right? We try to define what the point of view the customer was coming from, what their problem was they're trying to solve, right? Again, we are not solutioning, we are just trying to define the customer's problem. One way I like to do that is to use this kind of problem statement grid, or to start creating theme cards based off our product management thing that we talked about earlier. And we're trying to say, who has the problem? So we're taking our notes and we're saying, who has this problem? What are their needs? And what are the goals that they are trying to achieve? This is a great way to start building your themes for your product management. Once you have your problem defined, or you believe you do, now you start to brainstorm solutions. This is where you get your group together, all people in the group, not just the people that did the empathizing or the interviews, and we start to generate as many ideas as we can to solve the problem. We want large ideas. We want a lot of diverse ideas. We want to start thinking outside of the box, right? And we want to keep all of our own judgments aside. We want to really come up with the most broad-ranging solutions as we can, which then links us directly into the lean startup model, which we're not necessarily going to talk about, but a lean startup talks heavily about building a product canvas. And so this part of creating ideas, help start to build the first level of your product canvas in Lean Startup. So here now we're starting to talk about the groups that we're trying to identify, what value we're trying to solve, what product ideas that we have, right? So we're starting to build that Lean canvas. If you are not using Lean Startup, you can still use the Lean canvas. That's okay. That's great. Or you can just use another approach. But this is the approach that connects directly to Lean Startup. Once we come up with some ideas on how we're going to solve our problem, we start to prototype them. These prototypes should definitely be low fidelity prototypes. They should be drawings. They should be mock-ups. They should be cardboard cutouts, right? They are very cheap solutions that we can make to actually show to our customers. Okay, they do not have to be expensive at all. And I would recommend that your first cycle through design thinking is to create as simple prototypes as you can and to create multiples of them. Once you have the prototype, you take it out and you show it to your customers and you test the results. You say, if I created something that looked like this and it acted like this, would it solve your problem? And you're going to show all of those prototypes to your customers. You're going to record their results. And when I say record your results, it's not only just their thoughts, what they tell you, but I also highly recommend that you videotape them. Look at how they touch the thing that you gave them. Look at where their eyes go. Where do they move on the screen or on the piece of paper that you showed them, right? What are their emotions on their face as they begin to look at what you've done? Record those results, those testing results. Now that once you have the testing results done, you would go back then and you take all of your observations that you gathered up to this point and you start to synthesize those into some clear results. Now, I'm going to slide back here just real quick so we're here. And we've gone through the entire process. Once we get done through testing and we've observed the results, we're going to take that process through at least one more cycle. Now we are going to go back and we're going to re-interview our customers potentially, and we're going to redefine the problem, reiterate, and then we're going to modify our prototypes again, and we're going to send them out to the customers. In every design thinking exercise that I have ever completed, at the second cycle through, we have discovered that if we merge multiple prototypes together into a new idea, into a new prototype, we gain exponential results. So it turns out, generally speaking, that multiple ideas are good, pieces of them are, so you need to find a way to converge them all into one good idea, and then you retest that idea again. You can run through this cycle as many times as you need to until you actually discover the customer's true problem and how you can solve it. Okay, it's very important that when you're doing design thinking that you don't judge, right? That you question everything you know and everything that your organization does, you want to test it. You want to be very curious. You're looking for patterns and you want to listen very carefully. Now, an example of design thinking that I've recently gone through is I worked with a company who built a website that they were absolutely positive their customers would love. They built it, they spent about 6 months designing it, they pushed the first increment of that product out into the market, and very few people used it. I can't tell you what the product was, but very few people used it. So they were convinced that they had a winning idea. So they contacted me about doing some design thinking courses and some exercises. And we went back through their product and we went through and did some empathy work, and we did a whole design thinking exercise. We interviewed their customers and talked, and it turned out that their idea was pretty good that they originally had deployed. However, the customers were only interested in a small subset of the larger idea, and that was the only thing that they were willing to pay for. So after several efforts of ideation and prototyping, we scrapped the bulk of the website that they had built and turned our focus to just a small piece of it and started to modify it. It turned out that that's where the customer's real problem was. And so 90% of what the original company had built turned out to be of no value at all to their end customers. So they had to pivot and change their mind and how they built the system and think about their organization. However, if they would have done some design thinking activities up front with their potential clients, they would have known that their customers did not want the whole thing, and they could have saved themselves a lot of time, effort, and money, and could have focused their time, energy, and money on building the actual thing that the customer was willing to pay for. Now, there are lots of ways that you can run through design thinking, and lots of ways that you can identify ideas, and we're not going to go through hardly any of those today, but I'm happy to help you if you should need some in the future. Another great example of this is to understand where people are and who your customers really are. To understand that, older grandparents use websites different than, and applications different than millennials versus children. Right? A great perspective of this now is we all are using Zoom, and we're all using ways of collaborating in our work, and we're all finding flaws in the way all of those products worked, mostly because we built those products, Zoom built their products around the way they believed meetings should work instead of actually talking to their customers. A great article that I recently read talked about Zoom in particular, about how Zoom recreated the meeting experience online. However, we all know that if you go back and understand that it's the meeting process itself that is flawed in the first place. So if we went back and talked to all of us and we started talking about how can we correct the meeting process, we would talk about other things that we would need to do and other features or other ways Zoom could have worked instead of just recreating the meeting process, which is what Microsoft did when they created Teams. They tried to think through and interview their customers on better ways of creating meeting experiences, not just recreating the existing experience. All right, so it's about defining, going from the concrete to the emotional and understanding what our customers really want. It's about creating radical collaboration, bringing our customers in from day one, understanding all the disciplines that apply to building a product, and using that knowledge that we gain to build a true product. Before we ever write a single line of code, we are actually knowing what our customers' problems are. It really is all about empathy. It's about understanding how we can solve our true customers' problems. Then once and only once we understand what our true customer problems are, we can then start to plug them into our product management approach, and we can start to think about our themes or our outcomes that our customers want. And once we understand the true problems we're trying to solve, then we can start to come up with the features that we want to build in our next sprint cycle. All right, I'm bouncing around here just a little bit. All right, there is this great podcast. If you take a screenshot of this, podcast number 187, this particular CEO talks about how they use design to work through their problems. Now, I'm going to give you one more example of a design product that I am aware of, and something that interesting that come out of it is I recently was involved with an organization that was trying to design a better school backpack for college students. And they went out to the college students and they asked the college students, what are you looking for in a backpack? And they got all the details out and they started to build prototypes On the second round of prototyping, they decided to include the parents in the process to see what parents would want from a backpack. One of the interesting findings that we discovered, the differences between the college students and the parents were parents generally were willing to spend more money on quality. So quality became a huge factor for the parents, whereas for students, students didn't necessarily care about quality, they cared about feature and functionality. As we continue to interview our customers and go through prototyping, we discovered that in general speaking terms, our true customer on a college kid's backpack was not the college kid as you would expect. It was actually the parent. The parent was the one that was ending up purchasing the bag. So we had to find a way to merge in features and functionalities that would delight the college student, as well as incorporating the quality that parents were willing to pay for. What we learned very successfully in this product was that the cheap backpack with lots of functionality was never going to sell because parents would never pay for it. So if we had gone with our original prototype, we would have built this cheap backpack with lots of pockets and zippers and whatnot that nobody would have paid for. What we learned quickly was by adding the quality in, we were then solving the real needs of our customers, and we were able to build a more successful launch of a product. All right, design thinking is key to understanding what we talked about before about what your customers want, but it is also key in creating a product-centric instead of a project-centric mentality in your organization, which should be your goal as you move forward, is to create a holistic approach to how you're building your product and solving your customers' problems, rather than thinking of an idea, creating a project around it, throwing it out there, and hoping that a customer uses it, right? We want to create a more long-term vision of our product and about solving our real customers' problems. So in a nutshell, design thinking is the agile approach to doing an iterative design process to decide if something is worth building before you ever actually write a line of code or build an actual product. It is really the agile process of identifying the product that you should be building or the next incremental piece of that product. It dovetails very nicely into the agile and lean startup process, as well as to create that product mindset that we were talking about.